Get this thing on. In the book of Philippians chapter 1, just want to read a couple of verses of Scripture, and I want to bring a message on this thought of the wrong way to live. There's a right way to live, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Then there's a wrong way to live too. God has blessed every person with a gift every day that we get out of bed, and we're able to go through a day, and it's called the gift of life. You know, we have that blessed gift. And God gives it to us, and we that are saved, we ought to be using that very wisely. There's a right way to live, and there's a wrong way to live. And Paul said in the book of Philippians chapter 1 and verse 21, he said, "For to me to live is Christ," he said, "and to die is gain." And then he said this, "For to me, but he said, if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor." Do you see that? "And yet what I shall choose I wrote not." And so he said, "But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor." Now, he gives us a choice there. Basically, he said, my life for me to live is Christ. I can choose to live for Christ, and he said, and when I die, that's a great gain. Now, he's not going to heaven because he's living for Christ. But what he's saying is, I got a lot more on the other side than I have here. And heaven's a lot greater. I mean, I'd rather not, you can't even compare this world and this life to what God has prepared for his children on the other side of life, of this life, that is, on the other side of earth, and that's heaven. So he said, for me to live is to live for Christ. That should be my life. Living for Jesus, and then when I die, boy, it's going to be even greater. But then he said this, he said, "But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor." Now he said, I've got a choice. I can live in the flesh, and I'm going to reap the fruit of that labor, or I can live in the spirit and reap the fruit of that labor, living for God. And so we got to make a choice, how we're going to live, the right way to live. The right way, I would say this. Let's listen to some of these things I jotted down, and I'll just go through these real quick because I got several points here on the other. But the right way to live is on the front line for God. Wouldn't you think that'd be the right way to live? Not be following way behind, but on the front line for the Lord. And then the right way to live would be fighting the good fight of faith. Wouldn't you think that'd be the good way to live? As Paul said, I fought a good fight. I finished my course. I've kept the faith. And then I think a good way to live would be loving his appearing. Looking and loving the appearing of the Lord Jesus at any time he could come. You think about that. I hope he comes before I even get through preaching tonight, to be honest with you. I tell you, it'll all be over. We got so many folk that are suffering and so many people going through so many kind of things right now. It seems like we don't hardly even get out of a group that's going through a lot of things, and then it starts with somebody else. You notice that? And so people say, "Preacher, what's wrong with the church?" Well, it ain't just here; it's everywhere. I mean, I talk to people all the time that just going through something all the time. I was somebody over at the hospital the other night. I was on the elevator, went by to see Martin, and somebody over there going through some real tragic things in their life, and I don't even know them, didn't even know them, gave them gospel tract and tried to encourage them. And then the right way to live would be leaving behind a good testimony, Man, hey, let me tell you something. For your kids to know that mom and dad's in heaven or your grandparents is in heaven, that's worth more silver. I mean, there's not enough silver and gold in this life to replace that thought in their minds, to ease that thought in their minds. Hey, my mom and daddy were old-timey Christians, or my grandparents were old-timey Christians, And so leaving behind a good testimony. And then here's another good way and right way to live, and that is, we was a prayer warriors. I mean, we was a person who could get a hold of God and touch heaven and knew how to get our prayers answered. And here's another right way to live, and that is loving the Bible. And you know how you can do that, don't you? You know how you can leave behind the testimony that you loved your Bible? Wear it out. A wore-out Bible will be a good testimony. Hey, my mom and dad, my brother or my sister or whatever, my grandparents, they loved the Bible. They just wore out Bibles, you know. And then here's another one, winning souls. Man, that's the right way to live, trying to get people saved. I mean, you know, God's gave me that responsibility. He's gave you that responsibility, and so that's the right way to live. Paul said, "For me to live for Christ." For me to live is to live for Christ. And here's another one. I just put this one down, then I'll get to my sermon here. But being an honest person, you know, that's good to have a good name. The Bible said a good name's rather be chosen great riches tonight, and for a person to have a good name. You know, they was honest, and they was honest in their dealings and their whatever they was when they dealt with people and their debts and all that kind of stuff. Being an honest person, that goes a long ways. And old sinners, lost people, look at that kind of stuff, and they take a note to that stuff of people that try to beat their debts and all the time not. Keeping their words about things when they say, "I'll pay you," or this or that, or "I'll do this," and not keeping their word, just lie all the time, you know, lie about everything. Have you ever known some people that used to lie about everything? I mean, they've lied so much they can't never tell the truth. I know, what they call them, habitual liars or something like that, habitual liars or something. Just never can tell the truth, you know. And you look in their face and they're talking to you. I was at a restaurant one day eating, and I knew the man pretty good. And some fella come in, and he started just spouting off a bunch of stuff, and he looked over at me, and he said, "Don't believe a word he says." That's what he said. He said, "Every time his mouth is moving, I know it's a lie." You know, now that's bad testimony, ain't it? You know, and the right way to live is to be an honest person, tell the truth, and be honest. Now that's the right way. Now, Paul come back with that second verse there, and he said, "Now, if I live in the flesh, I'm gonna have to pay for that. I'm gonna have to get the results." Let me read that one more time to you, that last verse. He said, "But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor." I'm going to have to reap that. And that goes with what Paul said in the book of Galatians, chapter 6. He said, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. If he sows to the flesh," the Bible said, "he'll of the flesh reap corruption." That's what Paul was saying. "And if he sows to the Spirit, he'll reap that which is life everlasting." And in that same chapter, Galatians 6, he said, "And be not weary in well-doing, for you'll reap if you faint not." And so the right way to live and the wrong way to live. Let me give you some wrong things that we need to... and you say, "Why are you preaching on that?" Well, I'm preaching on both of them. I didn't give you the right way to live. Now let me give you some wrong ways, and we need to pay attention to it. First of all, don't live in the far country. Don't live away from God. The Bible said in Luke 15, most of you, we won't turn over there, but there was that boy, the two boys, and the Bible tells us that one of them, the younger one, came to his dad and got everything that belonged to him. And the Bible said he took his journey, and he took his inheritance, that is, and he went and left his father, and the Bible said he went into a far country. Did you see that? He went into a far country. That's Luke chapter 15. And he went into that far country, and the Bible said, and there in that far country, he wasted everything he had with riotous living. And of course, you know what the word riotous means. I've told it so many times. It means unrestrained living. Anything he wanted to do. If he wanted to get drunk, he got drunk. If he wanted to throw wild parties, he threw wild parties. If he wanted to take drugs, he took drugs. I mean, anything he wanted to do, throw it away on women, anything. He just took that which was his inheritance and went down into a far country, away from the Father's house, and he throwed it away with just unrestrained living. No kind of control in his life. He was in that far country and throwing everything to the dogs. Hey, don't live in the hog pens of this old world. That's what God's trying to tell us. That's all the far country has. He ends up in the hog pens getting ready to eat the hog slop. And basically, if you want to use this too, he ended up in the hog pens, basically, and that's the hog pens of this world. When we get out of God's will and get out in the far country as a saved person, that's the wrong way to live. But not only that, but he was basically hugging the devil's works, wasn't he? He was hanging on to the devil's works and living for the devil. There wasn't no living for his father and trying to keep a good testimony for his dad and his name and all. And here's the sad thing about it. That's the wrong way to live. That's the wrong way to live. Some of you say, preacher, I'm too old to live like that. Well, you don't have to be. Old folk can live wrong too. You ever thought about that? And I've told you some situations and stuff like that. And I know some right now that's living, I'm talking about in their 70s and 80s, that are living wicked, drinking and running with women and all that kind of stuff. And some of them profess to be saved. Now, you say, you reckon they are? Well, I don't know that. Only God knows that. At one time, they was living for the Lord. I know some pastors that are doing stuff like that right now. In the latter part of their years, they're just, everything they've labored for and the testimony they've built, they've just thrown it out the back door. Just thrown it out the window, That's sad, isn't it, And I want to finish good. I want to finish well, don't you? I don't want to end this life up. God help me, and you pray that I will, and I'll pray for you that we'll end our life pleasing the Lord and not living in the wrong kind of life. And so, this old boy, the wrong way to live is he lived in the far country. Now, there's a lot of people doing that today. And as I said, I just mentioned, that I know some that are doing that kind of stuff. But I remember so well. And let me tell you something. When you get down there and you get to living in this old world and get to hugging the devil's works and get down in the hog pens of this world, you are asking, and I am asking for trouble in such as that. Many years ago, in the church I pastored up in Virginia, I got a phone call one morning about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was a mother, and they come. She came, and the daughter and her grandkids, and all came to the church. And she had a husband, the daughter. She had a husband. His name was Donnie, and Donnie, he'd come once in a while, and I'd talk to Donnie, and Donnie ran with a rough bunch. And they'd say, preacher, I don't think he's saved. And I'd talk to him. He'd say, preacher, I know I'm saved. I'm just away from God. What he was saying is, I've got out in the far country. That's what he was trying to say. And he just lived terrible. He'd get out there with some of that crowd and get to drinking and get to drugging and all that kind of stuff. Well, I got this call, and his mama said, preacher, and it was snowing bad that day, and she said, if you can get out, said, is there any way you could get down to the Culpeper jail down there? Said they locked Donnie up and a couple more men early this morning. Said he's got in some real serious trouble. Well, she didn't tell me what it was, and I didn't really ask her, but I said, if I can get out. And I was able to get out sometime after lunch or so, and I got down there to the jail, and I knew those men. I'd visited in there before, and I think we'd even had some services and stuff like that. But anyway, they took me back there to his cell, and I began to talk to him. And I said, now, Donnie, your mom called me, and I said, what in the world's going on? And he told me he told me a story that it's really not really good to tell in mixed company. But I'll tell you just a little bit of it. This is what happens when you get to messing around in the hog pens of the world. And Donnie said, preacher, me and those two friends I run around with, we was coming through Culpeper last night, and it was snowing real bad. And it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. We'd been drinking, taking a lot of drugs. This was on a Monday morning. And he said, I should have been in church with my family last night. That's what he said. And it started snowing through the night after church and all, and it got pretty bad during the night. And he said we was riding down there, and this little old girl, 14-year-old girl, and her brother, whose mom and dad don't care where they're at or what they're doing, was walking on the sidewalk in that snow about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning down in Culpeper. And said, preacher, what happened was this little girl, 14 years old, 6 months pregnant. And said, we knew she was a bad girl, and said we picked her up, and her brother, she said, I'm not going to go with you unless my brother. And so they let him ride too. And they got her to drinking and taking drugs. And it wasn't too long, they was just plumb crazy. They took so much liquor and drugs that they went down to a rock quarry and down there on the other side of Culpeper, and there they molested that little 14-year-old girl. They just molested her, done terrible things. And like I say, I can't go into all the things he told me. And he said, but what we done, before we done any of that kind of stuff, he said, it's coming back to me, some of this stuff. He said, we took her brother, tied him to a pole out there in the snow, tied him up, little old 10-year-old boy, tied him out there to a pole, and he's out there about to freeze to death while they're doing their wicked, ungodly stuff. And then said, one of them said, you know, I heard that this baby she's carrying is a black baby. And the other one said, no, I heard it's a white baby. And they got to arguing, and they got to betting, and one says, well, I'll prove it's a black baby. And he took his hunting knife and opened her up and pulled that baby out. I'm telling you, it's a horrible story what he told me. And pulled that little baby out of its mother's womb. Of course, what it done is killed her and killed the baby too. And they realized again what they was doing, and they put her underneath the car and took the car and backed over her and the baby back and tried to pack them in the snow. It's just a horrible, horrible situation. And he said we left there and forgot about her little brother, and he's out there in the cold, tied to a pole, freezing to death. And somebody come in early at the quarry to go to work, and they seen that little boy tied to a pole, ran out there and got him in the warrant, and they seen all this blood and stuff, called the law. Of course, they left a lot of stuff where they could find out, you know, run some tests, and they found out who it was, and they went right, they was sitting on their doorstep the next morning and arrested them, took them down and locked them up, and charged all three of them with first-degree murder. And last I heard, this was a lot of years ago, he was to face the electric chair, I think it was, or the gas chamber. I can't remember. All three of them was to do that. Now, I said all that to say this. In my talking with Donnie, I said, Donnie, what in the name of heavens? He said, I know. He said, I'm saved. Now, somebody say, that man can't be saved. He said, I'm saved, but I'm so far from God. He said, I'm so far from God. If you'll read this story here in Luke 15, this boy belonged to his dad, and he left the father's house. And he got into an awful mess. Sometimes people don't think saved people can get into a mess, but I want to tell you something. If you start living in the hog pens of this world and hugging the devil's work, there's no telling what you and I will do. Can I have amen? There's no telling. And I'm here to tell you right now, just don't live in the far country. Get as close to God. As I said, the right way to live is, hey, get on the front line. Fight the good fight of faith. Get in the Bible. Live for God. Go to church. Try to win souls. Leave a good testimony. Be an honest person. That's the right way to live. And so, my dear friend, don't live in the far country. Number two, and a lot of times people don't like to hear this, don't live financially in debt to God. Don't live financially in debt to God. Now, somebody say, what in the world are you talking about money for? Well, it's in the Bible too, you know. John 3:16 is in there too, and then also 1 Corinthians over there is in the Bible about giving, talks about giving, how upon the first day of the week, 1 Corinthians chapter 16, upon the first day of the week, let us lay aside as God has prospered us. And so don't, God's people, now, we don't expect a lost person to give to the work of the Lord. If they want to, it's nothing we'll thank the Lord for it if they give. And there has been a lot of lost people that's given to the work of God and things like that. And some of them are doing it thinking they're going to merit some way to heaven and all that, but that don't help at all. You know that. But some people look at that. But here's the thing about it is, for a child of God to steal from God is a dangerous thing. Now, the Bible said there was a man by the name of Achan in the Bible. Y'all remember reading about him? You've heard him preached about Achan. And Achan, the Bible said that when they went down to Jericho to fight this battle, and Joshua was then in leadership, Moses had went on to heaven. God had taken him to heaven. And they went into Jericho and they fought that battle. And God said, now when you don't bring nothing back and all this kind of stuff. And said, now all the silver, the gold, and all this stuff, said, I want you to bring it into the storehouse of the Lord, to the priest, and put it in the storehouse. That's mine. The treasure belongs to the Lord, and I want it in my the storehouse. And so they didn't listen. And one of them didn't listen, that is, excuse me. And his name was Achan. And when they got down there and they fought that battle, and he come by and seen some silver and gold and Babylonian garments and all this kind of stuff, he saw all this. He got some of it, took it down to his house, dug up the ground, and buried this there. And he thought, now when everything's over and everything's gone, it's all said and done, I'll be a rich man. He had all this planned out. We'll try to plan out our sins sometime, but it don't work, does it? Be sure your sins will find you out. Amen? And so the Bible said that there was a little place down the road there called Ai, and it's spelled that way, Ai. And they were kicking up dust, if you want to, and the children of Israel, captain of the army there said, Joshua said, we'll send some the army of Israel down there and take care of them. And he said, there's no need in sending everybody down there, Joshua. Look what God did for us here. He'll do the same for that. We don't need that many. It's just a little small place. And so the Bible said that they went down there, just took a few soldiers, or not the whole army, and they went down there, and when they did, that little old place called Ai whooped the tar out of it. Here comes back this great army of Israel. Wasn't the whole army, but they come back. What they took, they were carrying dead soldiers. They were carrying helping wounded soldiers. And they had got beat. They had whooped them down there. And Joshua fell before God and said, God, what's going on? And basically the Lord told him, said, Joshua, get up, because there's sin in the camp. Somebody has sinned. Somebody has took of what the Bible called the accursed thing. Our offerings to the Lord, if we do what God tells us to do, they can be a blessing, and if we hold it back, they can become a curse to us if we steal from God. The Bible said, and of course in the Old Testament scriptures, and some say, well, it was under the law. No, it wasn't really under the law, because Abraham and all them, they wasn't under the law yet, and they gave a tithe. Remember Melchizedek, if you read over there in the book of Hebrews? And so the tithe was 10%, and so somebody's asked me, well, what's a good figure to start with? Well, I'll tell you what my pastor told me many years ago as a young Christian. I said, Pastor, I don't know how much to give. And he said, well, a good thing to do is what God told the children of Israel, start with 10%. The tithe belongeth to the Lord anyway, the Bible said. And so that tithe, or that whatever you want to call it, the offering, tithe, or whatever, can be a blessing or a curse to us. I'm talking about saved people. God don't expect the lost man to keep his work up, but he expects us to. And so they went around to every tent. Just think if somebody come around like Joshua and those men, they said, did you take of the accursed thing? Did you steal from God? Is what they was asking them. And they come to Achan and said, did you? And he said, yes, it's me. I'm the one that done it. I took some, I buried it in my tent. And so Joshua had them brought out. They brought him, his wife, his children. It's a good way to get rid of your mother-in-law and father-in-law if you want to. But he brought them all out. And they stoned them. And then they took, the Bible said, fire and burned them up. Boy, you better be glad we ain't under the law now. Say amen. We're under grace. And burned them, killed them all from stealing from God. Now, years ago, my pastor was visiting the hospital. And it was back when they had the semi-private rooms. Y'all remember some of them? They don't have much of that anymore, but unless you go in intensive care, most of the time people have their own individual rooms. But there's two people, and they'd have a little old curtain that they draw. Y'all remember that? Some of you remember that. And he said, I was visiting one of my members. And he said, I was talking to him and everything, and they'd had surgery. And he said, I had prayer with him, and I got ready to go. And said, my member said, well, Pastor, before you go, you might want to peek around that curtain. Said, you got another member over there. And Brother Bobby said, I do. He said, yeah. I said, he was brought in a while ago. And said, he's a member of the church too. And Brother Bobby said something through the curtain. He said, yeah, preacher, just push it back. I'm over here. And he said, I pushed the curtain back, and I looked at him, and I said, my goodness, I didn't know you was in here. And he said, I normally don't ask people what's wrong with you, but he said, what in the world happened? And he said, well, preacher, I'm just in here getting my tithes took out. He said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, I've been stealing from God, and God's just getting them back. Amen. Now, I'm going to tell you, we can be blessed of God, we can be accursed of God by not obeying God. And to be financially, hey, listen, don't live financially in debt to God. God will bless us if we'll just, he said, give, and it shall be given unto you good measure, pressed down, shaken together. God said, and I'll return it right into your bosom, and that's in Luke chapter 6. Now, somebody say, well, preacher, I tithe, or I give of my income, and I'm not even preaching to you. I'm just warning everybody. Amen? You know, this is a warning. Live right. Don't live wrong. The wrong way to live is to die knowing that you've stolen from God. You know, I've told it in the prayer room, I've told it from the pulpit here. I was preaching a revival years ago, and I got out of my car. Mine was on about the second row, and the pastor, they had a place like for me, it says pastor's parking, and he pulled in there, and his little family got out, his wife and all. And some more members was walking across the parking lot right there, and when he got out, he took his little old thing to lock the door, and he locked the door. And one of the men said, Pastor, what in the world are you locking the door for? Don't you trust anybody around here? And he said, look, brother, I know who tithes around here. And he said, if a man will steal from God, he'll steal from anybody. And he said, I'm going to lock my doors, you know. He said, if a man will steal from God, he'll steal from anybody. And so he locked his car doors, you know. But I'm just saying, my dear friend, hey, don't live a life and don't live the wrong way in financial debt to God. Number 3, don't live with bad feelings toward others. Be careful of that. It's easy, you know. I mean, I talk to people all the time that gets hurt in churches, and it's easy to get hurt. It hurts to get hurt. I've been hurt. You've been hurt. People said things to us, and it hurts to get hurt, don't it? I don't like to be hurt. I don't like my feelings hurting. I don't like the, you know, but here's the thing about it is, it's what I do with that situation is what's going to work in my life. I mean, by that I'm talking about if I let myself become a bitter person, then I become, if I don't watch it, I become just like that person that hurt me, you know. And I'll start lashing out. I wrote 3 things here. Number 1, don't live mad at the church. I know some people that's mad at churches all over this country. Why, you just start to talk to them and they'll I ain't never going back to church. You know what they done to me? You know what, or what they didn't do for me? A lot of people come to church, I say a lot. Let me rephrase that a lot of people don't. There are some people come to church to see what they can get out of the church. Isn't that true? And that ought not be our motive, you know. And then if the church don't do something for them, you know, and they say, well, why won't they do this for me? Or well, I'm going to tell you what, you know, I think God gives those in leadership wisdom, and they have to seek the mind of God and try to do what's right. And you know, it's hard to know sometimes. And you may miss it sometime. Maybe you should have helped a person or a certain person sometime. You may have missed that. Well, don't you get miffed at the church. Don't get mad at the church. The church didn't do that to you. I mean, you know, the devil is trying to make you say, well, they didn't help me. Well, I'm just using that as an illustration. There's other ways people get miffed at churches. But don't let that devil use that to cause you to get defeated and discouraged. I mean, God knows where you're at, and He knows where I'm at, and He knows what I have need of before I even ask. Isn't that what the Bible said? And so, don't get miffed at the church. People get miffed at the church because of something somebody's done or treated them or acted and all that kind of stuff. Be careful of that. I have to watch it constantly in my life, and you do too. And then number 2, don't get mad at the church, and then don't get miffed at Christian folk. Not everybody's going to treat you right. Not everybody's going to do right. And then number 3, don't get married up with bitterness. That old thing of bitter, man, if you become a bitter person, as I said just a moment ago, you're not happy. You ever known anybody that's bitter? I've known a lot of folk bitter. And you know what they do? They start lashing out at people. Be careful and don't become bitter in your heart. And so number 3, don't live with bad feelings toward others. Don't live this whole life. I know some people, and listen, I guarantee you've been saved any time at all or for many years. I know people that's been mad for 40 years at people and churches and all kinds of things. And they've gotten bitter and let that stuff get in their hearts. I think I told you last week of a man I've been trying to get to come to church. He comes once in a while, but he's so bitter at churches and got so mad and all this kind of stuff. And so, don't live with bad feelings. Number 4, don't live like a fool. Now, there's a lot of people living like fools today. And you say, you're not called a man a fool. Well, the Bible calls people fools. Here's some fools. Number 1, a fool is a man that says there's no God. The fool has said in his heart there is no God. Isn't that in the Bible? And so don't live like a fool. I mean, good night. You think just a moment, look around you, and if you can't see the hand of God in creation and all, man, this time of the year is a wonderful time of the year. It ain't too good on people that's got breathing problems, is it? Ain't too good for people that's got allergies and all that kind of stuff, is it? Man, the other day I was riding down the road and the wind was blowing so hard, and it looked like a yellow dust storm. I ain't never seen the pollen as bad as it is this year. I don't think I've ever seen it this bad. I got the hacking and the coughing and the carrying on and throats a tickling and all that stuff. And I'm still, as a matter of fact, this afternoon I tried to rest a little bit, and I got the hacking and the coughing, my throat itching down there. I knew what it was. It's that old pollen, It just it gets you. But the thing about it, my dear friend, this time of the year is a beautiful time of the year. Everything's coming alive, ain't it? Man, see all them beautiful flowers that are out? Well, these ain't real, But if they was, they're pretty not being real, ain't they? But we got some out that are blooming, stuff like that now, and pots of flowers that are beautiful. And the colors. What's them things called again, honey, that we talk about? They don't last long. Pansy, pansy. We got some of them things planted in front of our house, and I'm gonna tell you what, some of them purple blooms on them things, and then we got some that's got the yellow and the purple, and only God can make that color that beautiful. You ever looked at a rainbow? A good clear rainbow. I'll tell you something. I've got it on my phone somewhere. My home church one day, a couple of years ago, it came a bad storm, and then after it cleared off, there was a double rainbow. Yeah, anybody ever seen those double rainbows? It was two, distinct double rainbows right over the church steeples and everything. I thought, man, that is something. And only God can do stuff like that. Man can't do stuff like that. And you think about the heart, and I've talked about that, and watch that thing beat. And a lot of us have watched our own heart beating and all that kind of noise it's making, and we've seen all that kind of stuff. Man, it's amazing what God does. And so, hey, don't be a fool. And I don't know nobody that says that, But you know, we put this on the radio, these broadcasts, and then I think they're on streaming with the internet and stuff like that. Maybe somebody out there that just denies the existence of God. Well, God says you're a fool. That's what God says. And then not only that, don't live like a fool. A fool makes a mock at sin. Solomon said that in the book of Proverbs. A fool makes a mock at sin. A man that'll laugh and make fun of some old drunk out here and what sin is doing in people's life. I've seen people say, I've seen this happen. I don't know how many times they'll laugh and say, "Oh, you ever seen what kind of fool he acts like?" Well, he did act like a fool. God said he was a fool. He said a fool makes a mock of sin. And they're laughing at a man's sin, how much he was drinking liquor and all this kind of stuff and all that mess that people do. A fool makes a mock at sin. Don't live like a fool. A fool thinks, number 3, only of material gains. Remember that man in the Bible? And the Bible said about that man, he tore down his old barns and built new ones. And then the Bible said, he said to his soul, I've got plenty of meat and drink, and I've got plenty here. And he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. That's what he said. And God said to that man, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. You think about that. God called that man a fool because everything his emphasis on was what he had. And all that material stuff. Folks, we ain't taking nothing down here with us. I'm talking about materially speaking. Amen. Whatever you've accumulated, whatever I've accumulated, whatever we got, it's going to be all somebody else's. And so, you know, you think about it. And so, a fool, don't live like a fool, and then don't live in the wrong family. Now, as far as I know, everybody right here is saved, but if you don't know the Lord, now you think about it by your testimonies, but you just think about it. A person who's in the wrong family. There's the right family and the wrong family. What's the right family? The right family is the family of God. Those are people going to heaven. The wrong family is a family that's going to hell. Don't live in the wrong family. Make sure your name is written in heaven. Make sure you're saved. Make sure you're a child of God. That you've been born into God's family. Hey, you just don't, you know, the modernists say this, everybody's God's children. No, not everybody's God's children. The only way you can become a child of God is by being born again. That's what the Bible said. So we must be born again if we're going to even see the kingdom of God. So I say, hey, don't live, watch these things. These are words of warning. And we know the right way to live, but now Paul said, hey, if you live in that flesh, you're going to get to reap the fruits of that. That's going to come to you. It's going to come back and bite you. Let's make sure we're trying to live right for the Lord. Amen? Let's do so. Let's bow our heads. Every head bowed, every eye closed.